according to Mark. One of the scribes came to Jesus and asked him, "Which is the first of all the commandments?" Jesus replied, "The first is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. The second is this: You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than those." The scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You are right in saying he is one and there is no other than he, and to love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is worth more than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he had answered with understanding, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And no one dared ask him any more questions. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In the Gospel, Jesus responds to the scribe that the two greatest commandments are to love God with all of one's being and to love one's neighbor as oneself. St. Francis de Sales, who lived in the 1500s, a really great practical spiritual director, he comments on this passage from the Gospel of Mark. And he puts the question, so why should we love God, he says. So we should love God because God is infinite goodness and love. So then he asks, St. Francis de Sales, so why should we love ourselves? Well, his answer is because we are made in the image and likeness of God. And so since we're made in the image and likeness of God, and we're supposed to love God, we love God because we love ourselves. And then St. Francis de Sales says, because everybody possesses the same dignity as being made in the image and likeness of God, then we love our neighbor as ourselves. That is, we love our neighbor as holy and living images of God. Sometimes I think it's not always easy for us to see the image of God in ourselves or others. Sometimes we think it's obscured in ourselves, or worse, blotted out because of sin. People have the mentality that I'm no longer deserving to be called God's son or daughter, that I'm no longer in the image and likeness of God. And that's not true. It's never true. Especially in one who's been baptized has a stronger imprint of God's image and likeness on him or her. Sometimes, though, it's harder to see the image and likeness of God in other people. Also because of sin. Sometimes we see sin or point out sin in others, and we don't see the image and likeness of God behind the sin. But unfortunately, sometimes we don't see the image and likeness of God in others because of basic differences. That is, they're not like us, right? It's hard for me to love others who are different from myself. Different based on the language they speak, their culture, their skin color, their ethnicity, or even their religion that might be different from my religion. And so it can be hard to afford others the same dignity as God's image and God's children as we afford people like ourselves, right? Someone's more like me, sometimes I see that person more in the image and likeness of God, unfortunately. And yet in reality, everybody, all people are to be treated with great dignity and respect. The Catholic Church is truly meant to be a communion of persons, a community of persons, meaning we're not supposed to be sectarian, separate in any way, or just for a select few, supposed to welcome in and embrace all peoples, no matter who they are. So that all people, as different and diverse as we are in cultures and other backgrounds, are meant to live together in peace and harmony, not just in heaven, but also here on earth, starting right now. And not just here on earth, but even in our cities, in our dioceses, and in our own parish as well. And I talked a little bit about that this past All Saints' Day with the image from Revelation chapter 7 of an uncountable number of people from every race and multitude and nation and language and tongue together praising God in heaven. But it's hard for us at times to live in communion with people who are different from us. Language is a barrier, right? It's hard to be in communion and to get to know somebody who doesn't speak the same language I speak when we sit down at the table. It's hard for me to live in communion with that person. But it's not an insurmountable obstacle. But sometimes, even when we speak the same language, there are still other differences, right, in people. Differences in values, different ways of living, different attitudes, different forms of thinking, different concepts about time or freedom or family or religion, just different ways of viewing the world. And that makes it hard for us to live with that kind of diversity, those kinds of differences. It's not always an easy thing to do. The church is Catholic. That means the church is universal, not just going in everywhere and necessarily imposing its will on others, but universal in the sense that it embraces all peoples everywhere on the planet. All languages. Mass is celebrated in our diocese every Sunday in at least 15 different languages, and that's just in our diocese. Los Angeles has about twice that in their archdiocese. Every single Sunday, that many different languages, just 1 hour away from where we are right now in any direction. That kind of great diversity. And the church is meant to universal in the sense of embracing all those cultures, not imposing its will. There might be a oneness of faith, a sameness of faith, but the expressions of our faith can be different, and they're varied in many different ways. About 1,950 years ago, in the year 40 AD, the first great controversy in the Catholic Church was, does someone who wants to join our church need to be like us? That is, does somebody who wants to join our church need to be Jewish? Do they need to speak our language? Do they need to worship the way we worshiped? Do they need to follow our dietary laws? Do they need to follow the law of Moses? It's the first big controversy in the Catholic Church, huge controversy, in the Council of Jerusalem. And we read about it in Acts of the Apostles 10 and Acts of the Apostles 15. Paul mentions it in his letter to the Galatians as well. And the answer to that question was no. People who want to join our church don't need to be exactly like us. They need to profess the same faith, but they don't need to speak the same language. They don't need to have exactly the same attitudes towards life. They don't need the same historical background as we have. And so I suspect almost every single one of us is here today as Catholics because of that decision. And if they hadn't made the decision like that, many of us might not be Catholic today, because we might not have gone through the route of being Jewish first and then becoming Catholic. And so we're here today because of that decision, because people who want to join our church don't need to be exactly like us. Again, there's a unity and a oneness of faith, but the expressions can be quite different. Robert Putnam is an American sociologist, and doesn't write from a Christian perspective. He's written books on individualism in America and religion in America as well. And Robert Putnam says that Americans do not like diversity. We don't like diversity. We might not say that out loud, but we show it. And he says the American response to diversity is usually that of the turtle, to withdraw within our own shells and to not go out, to not try anything new. And again, this is from a non-Christian perspective. And he says that, this goes way back, he says, to times when in America in history we had our own cultural neighborhoods, and we still do to some extent, and even our own cultural churches 100 years ago, more so on the East Coast. But Robert Putnam says that there are the two strongest forces, positive forces, for diversity in America today, and he says this is based on their leadership, on the values of their leaders. The two strongest, most positive influences of diversity in America today are the U.S. military and the Catholic Church. Because you take everybody, right? And we don't just take everybody, we make you get along, right? In the military, you have to get along in the military. It doesn't matter if you don't speak the same language or come from the same background, you're fighting for the same cause. And a similar thing can be said of the Catholic Church as well. We make you get along. You sit next to one another at Mass, right? Sometimes, and you live together in the same neighborhoods, and it's not an option to not get along. It's we're not usually mentioned in the same breath as the U.S. military, but this is, I think, a very positive thing for the Catholic Church. And so, based on our leadership values, we're supposed to be inclusive of all peoples. St. Boniface is a Catholic church in Anaheim, and it was founded about 100 years ago by German immigrants. Anaheim, I guess, meaning the river of St. Anne, of Santa Ana. So over the years, they saw waves of immigrant populations coming in. It was German at first, and then English speakers came in. Then there were those who spoke Spanish, and then more recently, Korean communities and Vietnamese Catholics as well. So 5 different languages spoken inside that church over the course of 100 years. And I guess across the street is a Presbyterian church. And one day the two pastors were speaking to one another about the history of St. Boniface and of that area. And the Presbyterian pastor said, well, if St. Boniface had been a Presbyterian church, we would have had 5 different churches, one for each ethnic group. So he was impressed that the Catholic Church would struggle through and just keep one community, and that people would eventually be transformed and enculturate a little bit better, get to know one another and worship together, and get to know their neighbors who come from a very different cultural background. That's how it is for us as Catholics. It's not an option for us Catholics to not live in communion with people who are different from us. It's not an option. G.K. Chesterton was a convert to the Catholic faith, wrote in the early 1900s or so. I think he was observing people coming into Mass or something like that in very varied backgrounds, different places, the rich and the poor, clean and not so clean, different cultural backgrounds. And his comment was, here comes the Catholic Church. And I think it's one of the great things about being Catholic, and one of the things I'm most proud of being a Catholic, is that we just welcome all people into the church. It doesn't matter your cultural background or your financial background, your status. It doesn't matter what sins you may have had in your past. You're always welcome to be part of the Catholic Church. And so the Catholic Church is a communion in the midst of diversity. There's not uniformity in the church, as we all well know, because there's not uniformity in your family either. We think different things. We all have different opinions and viewpoints. We're not about being the same in the Catholic Church. Again, there's a oneness of faith, some things that all Catholics need to believe, and that unites us. But in the midst of that, we're very, very diverse. And yet that diversity, as we know, sometimes causes tensions, right? Tensions in every neighborhood in our country and around the world, causes tensions even in our diocese, even tensions in our parish from time to time. And I would say that, having been here for many years now, that you do a very good job in handling that diversity. You do a pretty good job of that. And yet there's always a call for us to be transformed, transformation of our mind and our heart and our attitudes. I think in the beginning, sometimes we think about just being very separated. Sometimes it's us and them, right? Us and the other people. Then maybe we slowly transform and our heart moves to a place of tolerance, right? Okay, I can accept them sharing my church, sharing my facilities, sharing my Mass and things like that too. We've kind of moved to tolerance a little bit, but that's not the end point. The final transformation is when we can have an attitude towards one family. These people, the ones who go to the 9 o'clock Mass, the 11 o'clock Mass, the 4 o'clock Mass, these are my brothers and sisters. This is part of my family. And I want to know them. I want to know more about them. It's good to hear their stories. They are welcome to sit next to me. There's room in my pew for somebody different than me. And that's eventually where we want to be as Catholics. That kind of the attitude of including other people, reaching out and welcoming and bringing people in and together. And I think in the end, that's good preparation for heaven, right? Heaven is composed of saints, but they're not the best people or the holiest people in the world. They're people like you and me, and people like everyone else on the planet. And they come from all kinds of backgrounds. And so it's good for us, we prepare ourselves for heaven, that is to stand and worship and commune with people different from us now. This is good preparation for heaven. And we're in a good place of the world and the country to do this. We're very, a little more diverse here than they are like in Nebraska, right? We're a little more culturally diverse in this part of the world, this part of the country. It's kind of thrust upon us. We struggle, but I think we've adapted. Just think how much in your lifetime, how much diversity you have seen and that you have gone through. And it's always more and more so like that. I think in the end, looking at the church is a little bit like looking at a portrait of Jesus. You see the portrait of Jesus, and from far away, it's very easy to make out the image, right? I know what that is. As you get a little bit closer, okay, it's a little bit fuzzier in some ways until you get as close as possible. It's made up of individuals, right? The church is made up of individual faces and families and names and peoples, and while far away, they might all look the same, right? Everybody from that country looks the same. Everybody in that culture is the same. As I get closer and closer, I see that they're individuals. The church is composed of families and peoples like that and like us as well. In the end, again, it's not an option for us as Catholics to not live in communion with people who are different from us. It's one of the ways that we listen and follow the commandment, the Old Testament, and the one that Jesus reinforces today, that I need to love my God by seeing and loving His image in my neighbor.